Hello, and welcome to another session of myNewsWrap. News from the world of SAP, Microsoft, and the world in between. So let's see what the last week brought to us with respect to news. Let's start with SAP and the business technology platform. First I want to highlight this blog post about SAP Business Technology Platform due to two reasons. First one is because it's an interesting use case, and the second one I will elaborate in a second. So basically, it's about making use of SAP Business Technology Platform in a quite handy use case from my perspective in the area of IoT and pay-as-you-go kind of scenario with a water purifier, which I think is quite nice from a use case perspective. And they kind of weaved things up with AppGyver for the mobile experience. Also fair from the perspective of SAP with respect to the acquisition of AppGyver. However, if you take a look at the high-level architecture and how AppGyver is integrated into SAP technology platform, it's basically like integrating any other third-party system, low-code platform, that there is absolutely no difference. And I would have expected at least some notion that AppGyver gets kind of integrated, but it's basically an integration via OData and REST. And yeah, that's it. So whereas the use case is great, the scenario and putting AppGyver in front is kind of lame from my perspective, because I personally would say I can do that with any platform, for example, Power Platform. There is also no notion with respect to, let's say, principal propagation or something like that. So having some advantages there. So yeah, nice scenario. Perhaps somebody has the time to elaborate on that one with the Power Platform and see what comes out. Now, sorry for beginning with a little rant, but that's kind of disappointing on pushing things this way. Now let's go to the positive side at SAP. And of course, if you have watched some of my videos, that's Kyma. Kyma kind of opened the gates for news. After some period of quietness, there is now the announcement that the Kyma runtime is available on AWS. So up to now, AWS was kind of a gap with respect to the availability. Now it's also there since a week, with all the nice options that come along that I highlighted last week with the enriched way of scaling Kyma there. So here you go. And there's also an announcement within the blog post that I, of course, referenced in the show notes, that there will be more exciting updates planned for the second quarter. So heads up, quite some things will come with Kyma. Then a second news, which kind of relates to Kyma, but is a part of SAP Business Technology Platform. And that's, from my perspective, it was a bug. I think it was handled as a feature request. If you connect systems within SAP Business Technology Platform, you have the global account system landscape view. And there you had the systems that where you had to register the systems in order to make them available within Kyma, or in order to pair the things and then have them within Kyma in the integration view. There was one shortcoming. You could not remove systems from there. So you could just register, and then you ran into some limitation, maybe because you only could have a certain amount of registered and I think federated systems. But you couldn't deregister one, and now it's possible to delete one. Having said that, there is still room for improvement, because you do not see if the registration is still actively used or if it's just a registration that is there, but is not used within a foundation or within an integration within Kyma, for example. So yeah, still some usability stuff to do there, but that's already heavily appreciated. And then there is one blog post by Gaurav Abi about user propagation when extending SAP solution with Kyma. That's kind of a big question, or an important part when you want to extend solutions to propagate the user. And for that, this blog post highlights how to do that with C4C, the identity authentication service on SAP BTP, and Kyma, especially making use of the gateway within Kyma, which is, to the best of my knowledge, kind of an add-on or extraction layer on Hydra that does the authentication. Quite cool walkthrough and highlighting what you have to do, what you can do. And what's also great, it's available as code within the extension sample GitHub repository of SAP. So that's really great, and from my perspective, really a highlight. So Kyma folks, let's keep things coming. With that, I'm already through the SAP side of the house, so not too much that crossed my way. So let's switch to Microsoft. Now, Microsoft has also made an acquisition again, and it acquired Kinvolk GmbH, which is a German company, which you might know when you are working in the area of Kubernetes. They have been acquired in order to push forward the Azure Kubernetes services and Azure Arc with respect to container deployment. Kinvolk per se specialized on containerd Linux and on cloud Locomotive, or it's called Locomotive, which is a Kubernetes distribution, or a kind of a Kubernetes stack, which is very security centered right from the start. So you can deploy it and you have already a quite secure setup right from the start. They are fully embracing open source. So I think that's really a cool acquisition and a really nice complement for the AKS offering on Microsoft. So I'm really looking forward to what's coming there. And then there was another announcement this week that Microsoft is teaming up with Coursera for the Azure specializations and scholarships, which from my perspective also heavily highlights the push of Microsoft towards making the educational stuff available for everyone, making it really high quality. So that's also great that this teaming up happened. And let's see what comes out over the next weeks and month. With that, let's switch to serverless. I've got quite some things there. First of all, Mark Duke, who is a Microsoft MVP and a founder of the Azure Functions University, so to say, created a blog post about the Azure Functions University. So highlighting how he came to the idea, how things went, how things evolved, and also highlighting that you can contribute. So for anybody who wants to contribute, I can only highly recommend to do that. You will learn a lot, and I think Mark is one of the most inclusive persons out there in the community, and it's really a pleasure to work with him. So even if you're not a super deep expert in an area, see what you might like to see in the Azure Functions University, see what is there, and might be need a translation, so to say, to another language, because currently there is quite a heavy focus on .NET. So maybe you want to transfer things to Python also. So that would really be highly appreciated, I would guess. Now, there is another blog post that I would like to highlight with Azure Functions, and that's calling APIs with Slack / commands. So integrating Slack and its APIs via a function app. So that's also quite nice scenario, quite nice integration scenario. And I think that's also a cool use case to kind of integrate those collaborative tools with other services via Azure Functions. Now there is another scenario or another use case that I would like to present to you, and that's about Azure Functions and MongoDB. And this blog post highlights one, let's say, open question that you might have when you use Azure Functions and a database. Because if functions scale to zero, the question is, do I have to create new database connections each time a function wakes up and runs, or is there any way to reuse existing connections? And this blog post highlights this scenario about, I think it's called workaround, but a way how to connect Azure Functions and MongoDB and reuse connections. With that, I'm already through the serverless part of Microsoft. So let's go to the miscellaneous part of the news. I have one blog post about deploying Bicep with Azure DevOps pipelines. So as you might know, Project Bicep is kind of an abstraction layer on top of the Azure Resource Manager templates, ARM templates, which is less chatty and more understandable from my perspective as ARM is, but it's in an early stage. So it's officially supported, but it's not not super battle proven like ARM. And this blog post kind of highlights how to deploy Bicep with Azure DevOps pipelines, what you have to do and what you have to think about, and where you might run not in limitations, but where you have to deal a bit with topics that might vanish in the future. So quite nice read. And then there is another blog post by the GitHub team. That's also really interesting. It's published on the GitHub blog. And it's about how to ship code faster and also safer with feature flags. So how does GitHub use feature flags, and how do they use them in order to make their deployments more reliable in case something goes sideways? What's also interesting is this is kind of the title of the blog and most of the description within the blog. But there is also a section about the different shipping strategies that GitHub applies. So that's also quite interesting because, well, as far as I've seen, they deploy quite often to production, and I think most of the time it works. So really interesting read. Now let's go to the world in between SAP and Microsoft. There I have two points that I would like to highlight. One is a blog post by Gregor Wolf about combining Power Automate, Microsoft Teams approvals, and of course, when currently Gregor Wolf is working on something, the SAP Cloud Application Programming Model. Again, a really cool blog post, and it's basically about approving things that, I mean, there is no specific use case that is too specific for approval workflows, let's put it that way. So you have approval workflows all over the place. And this blog post kind of highlights how you can integrate these approval with Microsoft Teams, starting from SAP Business Technology Platform and taking as a glue in between Power Automate, making use of Power Automate flows, which is kind of the workflow engine within Power Automate, which is, I think it's even the same basis, logic apps on the local platform, and custom connectors in order to connect things together. As usual, quite extensive, quite comprehensive blog post, also with a little demo video. That's quite cool. What's also great is the last section, or the last two sections of the blog post, that kind of address something that you also might have seen, experienced, however you want to call it, that although there is this big announcement of SAP and Microsoft's extended collaboration and that Microsoft team is super important also for S4HANA, there are not that many use around that area. So we know that Business by Design is really heavily integrating with Teams, but that was before the announcement of the extended partnership. And by design anyway acts different than the rest of SAP. But there haven't been that many news in that area. So either they are still in heavy development on bringing things together, or what I'm a bit afraid of, there is not too much to come from that announcement. But let's see, maybe Sapphire will bring some news there. And then second point that I want to highlight, you certainly have seen that. It's about the SAP on Azure video podcast, where a new episode comes out as every week. And this time it's about Zero Trust for SAP. I think that's a quite interesting topic, elaborating about how you can secure your SAP on Azure. So that's, again, nice session by Holger Bruchelt and friends. With that, I switch to the education and conference area. So I have 3 announcements with respect to conferences. The CAP conference recap has now a date. It takes place on June the 25th. And currently there is the call for papers. So if you have a CAP scenario and you want to share the knowledge, the experience that you made with CAP, then this is, I think, the place where you should put your paper. And then, as already announced several weeks ago, now registrations are open, first of all for Sapphire. So you can now register for Sapphire, which is again a purely remote event with one keynote and then several sessions that are location specific with respect to their timeline. And you can also register now for Microsoft Build, which takes place at the end of May. So you can now also register there. And I think there's also some ref agenda placed on the page, but no detailed agenda yet, but that's soon to come. And last but not least, one thing from the area of developer productivity. Last week, I highlighted the availability of the GUI options that you have now with Windows on the subsystem Linux, which is called VSLG. You have to have a quite high release of Windows 10, so you have to be on an insider ring. And then you can install or update your Windows subsystem Linux runtime in order to have that available. And Scott Hanselman, of course, already tried out several things, and his blog post highlights what you can do and also addresses some open questions with respect. Can I run, for example, GIMP on the VSLG, and do I have to take some things into account if I do so? He also has run Wine to run Windows under Linux under Windows, which is kind of, you can do that because you can do that, but it's just stretching the boundaries and what's possible and what's not. So if you are on such a high level of Windows 10 and you have some questions, then I think this blog post is a great starting point that gets you kicked off. Now with that, I'm already at the end of this week's myNewsWrap. I hope I had some interesting news for you. I hope I had some food for the brain for you from the different areas. And with that, I wish you a nice Friday, a nice weekend, and see you next Friday. Until then, bye.